My name is Dorothy Walsh, and I'm 60 years old. Every single morning for the past 21 years, I arrived at the grocery store on Maple Street before anyone else. My old station wagon would pull into the empty parking lot at exactly 5:30 in the morning, when the streetlights were still glowing orange, and the bakery next door hadn't even turned on their ovens yet. I carried a small silver key attached to a purple ribbon my granddaughter made for me in art class. That key opened the front door of Walsh Family Groceries, the store my late husband and I started back in 2003. He passed away in 2008, but I kept the store running. Every morning, I would unlock that heavy wooden door, and it would creak in the same spot near the bottom. The sound reminded me of Thomas, my husband, because he always said he'd fix that squeak, but never did. I'd step inside and smell the fresh vegetables we'd arranged the night before. The apples always smelled the sweetest in the early morning. Back when we first opened, nobody thought a small grocery store could survive. The big supermarkets were everywhere, but Thomas believed in something different. He believed people wanted a friendly place where someone remembered their names, where you could ask about the ripest melons and get an honest answer, where kids could get a free cookie from the bakery counter just for smiling. I remember our first day so clearly. We had 3 customers, just 3. Thomas made me promise that no matter what happened, we'd treat every single person who walked through that door like family. And I kept that promise, even after he was gone, even when my arthritis made it hard to stock the high shelves, even when the big stores dropped their prices so low I didn't understand how they made any money. I kept showing up. The key became more than just a piece of metal. It was my connection to Thomas, to our dream, to every customer who depended on us. Mrs. Chen came every Tuesday for her green beans. Mr. Jackson needed his special coffee every morning at 6:15. Little Emma always wanted to see if we had the strawberries she liked. That Tuesday morning started like every other morning. I parked my car, grabbed my purse, and walked toward the front door. But something felt wrong. The lights were already on inside. I could see them glowing through the windows. My heart started beating faster. Did I forget to lock up last night? I pushed open the door, and there stood a young man in an expensive suit. He was maybe 35 years old, holding a folder and looking at his phone. Behind him were 2 other people I'd never seen before. They were measuring the walls with a long tape measure. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "Can I help you?" The young man looked up and smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made my stomach feel tight. "Mrs. Walsh," he said. "Perfect timing. I'm Brandon Pierce from Megamart Corporation. We need to talk about some changes." I stood there in my worn sneakers and my purple cardigan with the flower buttons, holding my purse against my chest. Brandon explained that Megamart had bought something called a controlling interest in my store 6 months ago. I didn't really understand what that meant. My nephew Jerry, who helped with the paperwork sometimes, had mentioned something about investors. Money was tight, and he said we needed help. I signed some papers because Jerry said it would save the store. I trusted him. Brandon pulled out his folder and showed me graphs and charts with lots of numbers. He used big words like optimization and restructuring and market positioning. What he meant was simple. They were taking over. My store, the one Thomas and I built, was now theirs, and they didn't need me anymore. "We're going in a different direction," Brandon said, still with that cold smile. "Your services are no longer required. We'll need your keys and any access codes by end of business today." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. 21 years. 21 years of waking up before dawn. 21 years of helping customers find what they needed. 21 years of keeping Thomas's dream alive. And just like that, they were throwing me out like yesterday's expired milk. "But this is MY's store," I whispered. Brandon shook his head. "Actually, according to the paperwork, Megamart owns 78% of the business. You're a minority stakeholder. We have the right to make operational changes." One of the other people, a woman with perfect hair and sharp heels, stepped forward. "We'll offer you 6 months of pay. It's quite generous, really. You just need to sign this agreement and surrender all keys and access immediately." My hands started shaking. I thought about Mrs. Chen and her Tuesday green beans. I thought about Mr. Jackson and his morning coffee. I thought about little Emma and her strawberries. What would happen to them? What would happen to all the people who depended on this place, being more than just another supermarket? The woman pushed a pen toward me across the checkout counter. The same counter where I'd stood thousands of times, ringing up groceries and asking people about their families. Now it felt like a courtroom bench. "Just sign here, here, and here," she said, tapping her perfect fingernails on the paper. I looked down at the document. My name was printed at the top. Dorothy M. Walsh, terminated employee. Not founder, not owner. Just terminated employee. It had even spelled my middle name wrong. It said Marie, but it's actually Margaret after my mother. 21 years and they couldn't even get my name right. I reached into my purse and pulled out my key ring. The silver key hung there on the purple ribbon next to my car key and my house key. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I carefully untied the ribbon and placed the key on the counter. It made a small clinking sound. "Are you absolutely certain you want this key?" I asked quietly. Brandon barely looked up from his phone. "Company policy, all access must be returned." I nodded slowly and picked up the pen. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely write my name. But I signed each line carefully, the way my mother taught me. When you sign something, she always said, make sure you know what it means. I knew what this meant. It meant giving up everything Thomas and I had built. It meant losing my purpose, my routine, my connection to the community. It meant becoming invisible. I closed the folder, picked up my purse, and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear Brandon already on the phone, talking about renovation timelines and brand integration. I stepped outside into the morning light. The bakery next door was just opening. The smell of fresh bread drifted across the parking lot. For 21 years, that smell had meant the start of a good day. Now it just made me want to cry. I got into my station wagon and sat there, gripping the steering wheel. Then I drove home, where my small house felt bigger and emptier than it ever had before. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea getting cold in front of me. I couldn't drink it. I couldn't eat. I just sat there staring at the wallpaper with the tiny yellow flowers that Thomas and I had picked out together. On the refrigerator was a photo of us on opening day, standing in front of the store with huge smiles. We looked so young and hopeful. I opened the drawer where I kept important papers, birth certificates, Thomas's death certificate, the deed to our house. And underneath everything was a manila envelope I hadn't looked at in years. I pulled it out and opened it carefully. Inside were the original documents from when we bought the building. Not the store, but the actual building. The land and walls and roof. Back in 2003, we couldn't afford to buy the building outright, so we'd worked out a special arrangement. The owner back then, Mr. Henderson, was an old friend of Thomas's father. He agreed to lease us the building for 20 years at a very low rent, with an option to buy at the end. I spread the papers across the table and started reading. My reading glasses kept sliding down my nose, and the legal language was hard to understand. But one thing became very clear. The lease was an MY name, not the store's name, not the business's name. MY name, Dorothy Margaret Walsh. Because back in 2003, I had better credit than Thomas. The bank had insisted. We'd always meant to change it later, to put it in both our names or transfer it to the business. But life got busy. Thomas got sick, and we just forgot. I read through every single page, my heart beating faster with each paragraph. The 20-year lease had ended last year in 2024. According to the contract, it had automatically converted to a month-to-month tenancy unless either party filed a renewal notice. I checked my email. I checked my mailbox. I checked every folder in my drawer. Megamart had never sent me a renewal notice. They didn't even know I was the landlord. They thought they'd bought the business and the building together, but they hadn't. I sat back in my chair and just stared at those papers for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Outside, I could hear neighborhood children playing. A dog barked. Life went on like normal, but inside me something was shifting. For 21 years, I had been the person who made things work, who showed up early and stayed late, who fixed problems and helped people. I had believed that if I worked hard enough and cared enough, people would treat me fairly. But they hadn't. They'd thrown me away without a second thought, misspelled my name, handed me a check and expected me to disappear. I thought about Thomas. What would he do? I knew exactly what he'd do. He'd stand up for what was right. He'd protect what we'd built, not for revenge, but because some things matter. Some things are worth fighting for. I picked up the phone and called my nephew, Jerry. "Jerry," I said, my voice steadier than it had been all day. "I need you to look at something. And then, I need you to help me find a lawyer." 2 days later, I sat in a small office that smelled like old books and coffee. The lawyer, Ms. Patricia Chen, daughter of M.Y. Mrs. Chen, who bought the Tuesday green beans, spread my documents across her desk. She read through everything twice, making small notes on a yellow pad. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes that reminded me so much of her mother. "Mrs. Walsh," she said carefully, "do you understand what you have here?" I nodded. "I own the building." "You own the building," she confirmed. "The lease has expired, which means you have the legal right to end the tenancy with proper notice. In this state, that's 30 days for a commercial property." She tapped her pen against the paper. "Megamart Corporation fired you from your own store, but they're sitting in your building without a valid long-term lease. They probably assumed the building was part of the business assets they purchased." "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia smiled, and it was her mother's kind smile. "You can give them notice to vacate. They'll have 30 days to either negotiate a new lease with you or move out." My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. "Will this really work?" Patricia reached across the desk and patted my hand. "My mother has talked about your store for 15 years. She said you always gave her the best vegetables and asked about our family. She said you were there when my father was sick, bringing soup and offering prayers. That meant everything to her." She straightened her papers. "Yes, Mrs. Walsh, this will work, and it's completely legal. They should have done their homework before they fired you." That afternoon, we prepared the notice together. Every word was checked and double-checked. The next morning, Patricia personally delivered it to Megamart Corporation's headquarters downtown. I wasn't there to see their faces when they received it, but I imagined Brandon Pierce's smile finally disappearing. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my daughter Rachel in Portland. We hadn't spoken much since she moved away. Life gets busy, but I needed to hear her voice. "Mom," she answered, surprised. "Is everything okay?" And I told her everything. Call came 3 days later, just after dinner. I was washing dishes, my hands deep in warm, soapy water when my phone rang. The number looked official. I dried my hands and answered. "Mrs. Walsh." The voice was sharp and angry. "This is Brandon Pierce. What the hell do you think you're doing?" I sat down slowly at my kitchen table. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The eviction notice," he shouted. "You can't just kick us out. We own that store." "You own the business," I said calmly. "I own the building." There was a long silence. Then, "This is extortion. We'll sue you." "You can try," I replied, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "But my lawyer says everything is legal. You never renewed the lease. You never even contacted me as the property owner." Brandon's voice changed. The anger disappeared, replaced by smooth business talk. "Look, Mrs. Walsh, let's be reasonable. We can work something out. What if we offered you, let's say, $200,000 right now, cash? You sign over the building, and we forget this whole mess." $200,000. I sat there staring at the photo on my refrigerator. Thomas and me, young and hopeful. With that money, I could pay off my house. I could fix the roof that leaked every winter. I could visit Rachel in Portland whenever I wanted. I could stop worrying about money for the first time in years. "Mrs. Walsh," Brandon's voice pressed through the phone. "That's a very generous offer, more than generous. Take it." I closed my eyes. I thought about Mrs. Chen's green beans, about Mr. Jackson's coffee, about little Emma's strawberries. I thought about how Brandon had looked through me like I was nothing, how they'd misspelled my name, how they'd taken everything Thomas and I built and treated it like it meant nothing. I thought about my granddaughter's purple ribbon still sitting in my drawer. "No," I said quietly. No, Brandon sounded shocked. Mrs. Walsh, be reasonable. You're 60 years old. You need to think about your future. I am thinking about my future, I said. And my answer is no. You have 27 days left on your notice. I suggest you start packing. I hung up the phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The next morning, I drove past the store. There were expensive cars parked outside. Men in suits stood on the sidewalk, talking on phones and waving their hands. Through the windows, I could see boxes being stacked. The Mega Mart signs were still up, but they looked temporary now. Scared, I didn't stop. I just drove slowly past, the same route I'd taken for 21 years. But this time, I wasn't going to work. I was just watching. That afternoon, Patricia called me with news. A small organic grocery chain called Green Valley Markets is looking for a location on Maple Street, she said. They focus on local farmers and community connections. They asked if you'd be interested in leasing to them. How much are they offering? I asked. Patricia told me. It was 3 times what I'd been getting from the original arrangement. 3 times. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to help Rachel. Enough to finally fix that leaky roof. They also asked, Patricia continued, if you'd be willing to stay on as a community consultant. They want someone who knows the neighborhood. I sat down, feeling dizzy. They want to hire me. They said they need someone who understands what the community needs, someone people trust. They're offering $40 an hour part-time, whatever schedule works for you. I started crying, not sad tears, different tears. After I hung up with Patricia, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The afternoon sun came through the window and made patterns on the floor. Thomas's foe smiled at me from the refrigerator. I could almost hear his voice. See, Dorothy, I told you good things come to good people. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched as Megamart packed up and left. They took their fancy signs and their corporate posters. They took their computerized registers and their bulk discount programs. The building stood empty for 3 days. Then Green Valley Markets arrived. They painted the walls a cheerful yellow. They installed new windows that let in more light. They built shelves from reclaimed wood and set up a corner for local farmers to sell their produce directly. On opening day, I stood outside in my best purple dress, the same one I'd worn to Thomas's funeral, but today felt different. Today felt like a beginning. The manager, a kind woman named Susan who was maybe 40 years old, put her arm around my shoulders. Mrs. Walsh, she said, would you like to do the honors? She handed me a pair of giant scissors decorated with ribbons. Together, we cut the ribbon stretched across the doorway. People clapped. Mrs. Chen was there, crying and hugging me. Mr. Jackson shook my hand and said he was glad to have his regular coffee spot back. Little Emma, who was bigger now, asked if they'd have strawberries. The best strawberries in the city, Susan promised her. I stepped inside and breathed deeply. It smelled different but also familiar. Fresh vegetables, baked bread, hope. This wasn't the same store Thomas and I had built, but it was something good, something that honored what we'd started. Something that proved that treating people right, caring about your community, and standing up for yourself actually mattered. That evening, I drove home slowly, taking the long way past the waterfront. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. My phone rang. It was Rachel. Mom, she said, her voice excited. I've been thinking, what if I moved back home? I could get a job in the city. We could see each other more. My heart felt like it might burst. I'd love that, sweetheart. I'm proud of you, Mom, Rachel said. Dad would be proud too. After we hung up, I pulled into my driveway and just sat there for a moment. Through my windshield, I could see my little house with its flower garden that needed weeding, the roof that still leaked, the porch that sagged a little on one side. But it was mine. I had protected it. I had protected Thomas's memory. I had protected what mattered. I got out of the car and walked up to my front door. From my purse, I pulled out my key ring. The silver key on the purple ribbon was gone, of course. But my house key was there, solid and real. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. The next few months changed everything. I worked 2 days a week at Green Valley Markets, helping customers and connecting them with local farmers. Susan asked my opinion on everything from which apples to stock to how to arrange the checkout area. Mrs. Chen brought her daughter Patricia by for lunch sometimes, and we'd eat sandwiches in the break room and laugh about old times. Mr. Jackson trained the new staff on how to make his special coffee just right. Little Emma got a job as a weekend cashier when she turned 16. The money from the lease paid off my house completely. I fixed the roof. I painted the porch. I planted new roses in the garden, the yellow ones Thomas always loved. Rachel moved home and got a job at a school nearby. Some evenings, she'd come over and we'd cook dinner together, talking and laughing like we hadn't done in years. One Saturday afternoon, I was organizing the produce section when a familiar face walked through the door. Brandon Pierce. He looked older, tired. His expensive suit didn't fit quite right anymore. He saw me and froze. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then Brandon walked over slowly. "Mrs. Walsh," he said quietly. I waited, arranging apples. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry for how we treated you. You didn't deserve that." I looked at him, really looked. He seemed smaller somehow, less certain. "You spelled my name wrong," I said simply. "I worked there for 21 years and you spelled my name wrong." Brandon nodded, looking down. "I know, we were wrong about everything." I picked up a perfectly ripe apple and polished it on my apron. "This store," I said, gesturing around us, "is what happens when you treat people right, when you remember their names, when you care about more than just money." I handed him the apple. "Have a nice day, Brandon." He took the apple, thanked me quietly, and left. I watched him go and felt nothing but peace. That evening, I went home and did something I'd been putting off. I took the silver key on the purple ribbon out of my drawer. I put it in a small frame, along with a photo of Thomas and me on opening day. Underneath, I wrote, "Some doors close, some doors open, but family and community last forever." I hung the frame in my living room where I could see it every day. The key glinted in the afternoon light, no longer a tool but a reminder. A reminder that standing up for yourself matters, that loyalty should go both ways, that even at 60 years old you can start over, you can fight back, you can win. And most importantly, that the keys to your life should always stay in your hands, nobody else's. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in Thomas's old chair, and smiled. For the first time in 21 years, I wasn't worried about tomorrow, because tomorrow was mine to choose. And that, more than anything else, was worth more than all the money in the world.